Okay, so you can see that on my poem here, I've got quite a lot of notes already, but I'm going to talk you through them and I'm going to add bits on as well. So I wanted to start with the title of the poem, like we did with Exposure, and I've highlighted that in my interpretation colour because what's really important is that you consider and start questioning why the poet has chosen that as a title. So if we look at the words in isolation, I think they have two completely separate meanings, especially when we're considering modern uses of photography. It seems to be everywhere. Even apps are created around it, and considering the positives and the negatives and what they're used for is quite important. I think when you consider photography in the 21st century in a privileged or fortunate country like ours, like the UK, we start considering photography in terms of Instagram and selfies and what we take pictures of with our phones, like each other and food and, you know, things for no particular reason. There's no real rhyme or reason. We don't take very many for memories anymore. And we do as well. There are some for family, but they seem on the whole to be quite positive. But when you couple this word with war, and we already have quite negative, quite emotional images that come to mind when we consider war, we start to think that, well, what is the impact of a photographer at war? And what is their purpose and what are they there for? And if you consider what they do and why they do it, that's quite important. And all these questions that it's making me think are the ideas that you would write down, because the poet does want you to consider that as a role and what purpose it has. So war photography, taking pictures of destruction and war and death and bringing that back to the UK and putting it in newspapers, what impact does it have? Are we too desensitised? What images are chosen? Is it strategic? What's its purpose? Is there a purpose for a war photographer out there, or should they be doing something different? All these questions, all these ideas are there and answered to a certain extent in the poem, but essentially those reactions are quite important, because poetry is meant to make you have a reaction and meant to make you think those things. So all those questions, all those ideas, put them into your answer, put them into your understanding and interpretation of this poem. Okay, so if we look at the first stanza, we start straight away with the camera, and I think this word's quite important here, reassurance. So I'm gonna highlight it in my interpretation colour and consider that as an emotional reaction. So the reassurance of the frame is flexible. So the word reassurance in isolation suggests calm, familiarity. And I think when we consider that as a phrase on its own, from a job perspective, there's that sense of feeling safe, which actually is in contrast to, juxtaposes war. Because nobody is safe in war. Nobody should feel reassured. But for the cameraman, camera woman, there is a safety behind the frame. We get this alliteration here of this camera. There is a safety, there is a reassurance of the frame, but it's flexible. And I think it's important that you look at this alliteration here, because when we look at a picture frame, so if we look at it up here, what comment might she be making? And I think it makes me think, as the reader, that when you look through a camera lens, you're almost cut off from what's around the outside. You can't see it. You can choose what's shown in there, and we can manipulate what's in there. We can control this little area, and the war photographer maybe feels that they can control this frame. But I think what's important is she's coupled that word frame, which is quite rigid, quite static, with the word flexible, which means that it moves. So there's a contrast there of the rigidity of a frame, of a camera and a photograph, but also the idea that it's movable, it's flexible, it can change. And we need to consider it, the reader, if she's saying that that's a good thing or not. I definitely think my interpretation here might be the sense that she has some sense of control of what she can take a picture of. There is a sense of control. She can move it, she can adjust it, it's flexible, but at the end, the frame is rigid from when she takes that picture. As soon as she clicks the camera, that's it. The choice has been made. And she's got that control. She can choose when to move it, when to adapt it, when to take the picture. So a sense of security there behind the camera. So I might add the word secure there. Okay. Then we get this hyphen that starts the second line. Hyphens, punctuation, that's part of our structure. And I've labelled there already, but we've got a personal pronoun. We're directly being spoken to here, you. You think that just outside it. And I think we need to consider who she's talking about there. She's talking about herself. I think that just outside it. Or you might think that just outside it. So there's a judgment call being made there. Or is it a message for us? But what she's suggesting here is just outside that picture that she takes could be, or we might think, people eat, sleep, love normally. Okay? Almost as if the suggestion there is they purposely pick out the worst things. And we try and convince ourselves that when we look at pictures of war, that just outside it everyone's happy and they're only picking out the bad things and maybe not seeing the good things. And we get this list here, which exaggerates that idea. And I've put here a sense of luxury because I'm thinking back to that comparison that she made in the context that this is about poverty and leisure. And again, we've got this idea of luxury, of leisure, of happiness that we believe is just outside a camera, just outside what the camera person has chosen to take a picture of. I think perhaps that's a little bit critical of her on us as observers of the pictures of war. Because we get this juxtaposition, we get this discourse marker here, whilst I, in comparison here. Normal people look for happiness, sleep, love, eat, but I don't. I purposely seek out the tragic, the absurd, to make a subject. So we've got the opposite here. Here's the happiness, the leisure, here's the poverty. First person, again, I would note that as language. This is personal perspective. I seek out the tragic, the absurd to make a subject. And almost as if they're statements there. The tragic, sadness. I've seen that word before, looked at it in context earlier. This sadness, death. I'm just going to highlight that in my interpretation colour as well. And then this word here, the absurd, almost as if what she takes pictures of is beyond her understanding. It's so bad, it's so horrendous. She can only see it as it being ridiculous, appalling. And there are no other words she can use to explain that. And she admits that these are the things that she looks for purposely. She seeks them out. She goes in search of these sad things, these ideas of death, this ridiculous, unbelievable happenings around the world to focus on. And again, we get this this discourse marker here. Or, if the picture's such as lifts the hearts. So, again, we get this contrast in her job. She either seeks out awful, or she seeks out pictures that are going to lift the heart, this metaphorical idea of making you feel better, making you feel happy. So she's got a contrast in her job here. She's either looking for the tragic or, she's either looking for the tragic or she's looking for something to make us happy, something to make us believe in humanity again. And then here, something else that I picked up on, last thing, the firmness of the edges. She's gone back to talking about the camera here. And I've picked up on the alliteration that's extended here. So I've numbered it 1, 2, 3 because I think this word here, when she's talking about the camera, links back to frame and flexible. The firmness of the edges can convince you this is how things are. She's talking again about this rigid box around a photograph that's firm, that's immovable now the picture's been taken. And again, we get this you. It convinces us me, the reader, us that look at pictures, that that's how things are. And I think that's a comment there. I think she's trying to say to us that outside that picture, there's more outside the picture. That what we see isn't the whole picture, ironically. That there is it's bigger than the picture. It's broader than. Maybe more important than. And she wants us to understand that as the reader. Okay, have a pause of the video and move on to the second step if you're ready to do stanza 2.